Welcome back to the channel. Today, I've picked out 3 interesting stories for you. Spoiler, the first one will be long but captivating. Enjoy watching! I thought my brother's rule was just a symptom of his anxiety. I was wrong, and now I'm hiding in my room. I don't know how much time I have. I called the police, but we live on the edge of town, and the dispatcher sounded skeptical. She said they'd send someone to check the health situation. Health situation. I can hear it outside my bedroom door right now, and I don't think they're concerned about health. I'm writing this because I need someone to know. I need the sequence of events to be recorded because, if they find me, I think it'll all be pointless. And if they don't find my brother, I can't even think about that. This all started 3 months ago when my life took a nosedive. It was one of those big cinematic failures you see in movies, but never think will happen to you. I lost my job, then, in a series of bad choices, I lost my apartment. I had nowhere to go. My parents were gone, and my friends scattered, most of them struggling to make ends meet themselves. There was only one place I could go: my younger brother. He lives in a small 2-room rental on the very edge of town, right before the forest. A house that's cheap for a reason. Of course, he was happy to have me. We'd always been close, especially after our parents passed. I should have been the one looking out for him, the reliable older brother. The irony hit hard when I moved in with him. All my belongings crammed into 3 cardboard boxes and a duffel bag, taking up his spare room. I knew my brother had problems. He never fully recovered after the accident. It happened about 5 years ago. He was driving across the country alone, trying to find himself, like people do in their early 20s. Somewhere in the endless, desolate stretch of road, he fell asleep at the wheel. The car veered off the road and flipped over several times. He was lucky to survive, and the cop who found the wreckage the next morning kept repeating that to him like some kind of mantra. But the cop didn't find him right away. The first few hours after the crash were a blur for him. He remembers crawling out of the twisted metal, everything upside down, bleeding and disoriented. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. He was miles away from civilization, the highway a silent ribbon of empty road. He thought he was going to die out there. And then he saw someone, a figure walking toward him from the distant, flat plains. He couldn't describe the person exactly. Old, he said, skin like cracked leather, long dark hair braided and adorned with something shiny in the fading light. He carried a staff, a shaman, a healer, like something out of an old forgotten history book. My brother was delirious, convinced he was hallucinating from blood loss. The man, he said, treated his wounds with strange-smelling herbs and gave him water from a clay jug that smelled like earth and minerals. The man spoke in a language my brother didn't understand, clicks and soft guttural sounds. But my brother said he understood him perfectly. The old man told him he was lucky. He said something had been drawn to the crash site, something that lingered in these empty places. He intervened. He performed a ritual to bind my brother's life force to the world of the living, to keep it from slipping away into the sand. But such things, the old man said, always come with a price. He had tethered my brother to life, but that tether had a chain. The last thing my brother remembers before losing consciousness was the old man saying, "You are saved, but you will not go home alone." When he woke up, the sun was rising, and a cop was shining a flashlight in his face. The old man was nowhere to be found. The only thing left was a dark feather on the dashboard. The doctors chalked it up to trauma, hallucinations from the concussion. A coping mechanism his brain created to deal with the experience of clinical death. And I believed them. It made sense. It was a reasonable explanation, but the crash left more than just a story. He came back different. He developed terrible claustrophobia. He couldn't be in elevators or small rooms without windows. He had panic attacks in crowded movie theaters, and he started having nightmares. Every night he'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. Then there was the window in his bedroom, the one that looked out onto the dense, dark forest behind the house. Had to be open. I mean, wide open. Always. When he slept, the curtains were drawn, but the window itself was always pushed wide open. It didn't matter if it was a warm summer night or the harsh cold of winter. That window was always open. At first, I thought it was just a quirk, a symptom of his anxiety. Fresh air, the illusion of escape, whatever. But I'd wake up in the mornings and the whole house would be freezing. I'd find a thin layer of frost on the kitchen table. I'd see my breath in the hallway. I complained, reasoned, begged. "I can't," he said, his face pale and haggard. I can't close it. I can't breathe if it's closed." I felt guilty for insisting, so I gave in. I bought thicker blankets. I wore sweaters around the house. I accepted it as part of living with him. This was his house, his rules. I was just the freeloading brother. The first month went by okay, or as okay as it could. I looked for a job and he went to his part-time job at the local library. The house was cold and he was still having nightmares, but overall the routine was stable. Then things started getting worse. His nightmares became more intense. I'd hear him sobbing and tossing around in his sleep through the thin walls. Sometimes he'd mutter short, choked phrases like, "Go away, don't look at me, not here." One night, I heard him clearly say something that sent shivers down my spine. "It's back in the trees, the tall man." The next morning, I asked him about it. He just shook his head, eyes wide with fear. "It's just dreams," he muttered, not looking me in the eye. He said the dreams were always the same. He was in his room, in his bed, paralyzed, and through the open window, standing at the edge of the forest where the moonlight barely reached, there was a figure. Tall, incredibly thin, like an ink line drawn against the darkness. It didn't move, didn't do anything. It just stared at him. I told him it was stress, my moving in, his own anxieties. I suggested he see a therapist. He refused, as always. About the same time, small, unexplainable things started happening. It started with my keys. I always leave them in a ceramic bowl by the front door. One morning, they were gone. We searched the entire house. 3 days later, I found them in the freezer, wedged between a bag of frozen peas and an ice cube tray. I shrugged it off, blaming it on my own stress. Then there was the remote. It disappeared from the coffee table and reappeared on the bathroom medicine cabinet. My brother's library card ended up in my boot. It was irritating, a series of small annoyances that we both chalked up to each other's scatterbrained moments. A shared chaos of two adults living in a small space. But something felt off. It felt like something was playing with us. Then came the scratching. It always happened at night, usually around 3 a.m. A faint scraping sound from inside the walls. At first, I thought it was mice or squirrels. I bought traps and set them in the attic and basement. They stayed empty. The sound continued. It wasn't the frantic scurrying of rodents. It was slower, more deliberate. Dry, rasping, like a long nail dragged across drywall. It started in the living room wall, then moved through the hallway, sometimes seeming to come from above my bed. My brother claimed he didn't hear it because of the wind howling through his open window. I think he was lying. I think he didn't want to hear it. But what disturbed me the most was the dirt. Because his window was always open, leaves, dust, and bits of the forest would blow into his room. Every morning, part of his ritual was sweeping up a small pile of debris that gathered under the windowsill. One morning, I woke up early and went to make coffee. Passing by, I peeked into his room, and what I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. The scattered leaves and dust had been arranged in a pattern, a perfect, intricate spiral, winding out from the center. It was too perfect to be natural, too deliberate to be the wind. It reminded me of one of those sand mandalas, but made of fallen leaves and dirt. I stared at it for a long time, a cold sense of dread creeping up my spine. When my brother came out of the bathroom, he saw me looking at it. He just sighed wearily and grabbed the dustpan. He wasn't surprised. He just swept it up, like it was a normal thing. I saw it again a week later, and again. Each time, it was the same. Sometimes a simple spiral, other times a more elaborate web-like design. But it always appeared after windy nights. I told myself it was the wind, some strange vortex effect caused by the airflow in the house. A physics oddity. But deep down, I didn't believe it. Not really. I began to feel like I was a guest in a house that had a life of its own secret, creeping madness. My patience wore thin. The constant cold gnawed at my bones. The nighttime scratching kept me awake. I was on edge, irritable, and my job search was going nowhere, which only made everything worse. I looked at my brother, his hollow eyes and constant shivers, and I saw the source of all the suffering that seemed to hang over this house. I saw the open wound in his room, letting in all this cold, all this strange energy. I became obsessed with the window. It seemed like if I could just close it, everything would go back to normal. The cold would stop, the drafts would stop, the leaf patterns and scratching would stop. My brother's nightmares. Maybe even they'd stop. Maybe, if I could just close the window, it would finally make him feel safe again. I was a rational person. I believed in science, in cause and effect. I was convinced that all this, the paranoia, the misplaced objects, the noises, was psychological. A symptom of our shared stress, exacerbated by the physically uncomfortable environment he'd created. Close the window, warm the house, and the ghosts would vanish. It was simple. Yesterday was the last straw. I woke up after a particularly terrible night. The scratching was louder than ever, and I could hear my brother crying out in his sleep. I, trembling, rushed out of my room and found a new pattern on the floor. This time, it wasn't a spiral. It was a long, thin figure, like a stick figure, but with unnaturally long arms and fingers that resembled claws. It was made from pine needles and black dirt. I just stared at it, and inside me, a rage boiled up that I hadn't felt in years. It was so deep, so wrong. My brother was at work. He wouldn't be back for hours. I knew he'd be furious. I knew it would be a betrayal of the one rule he had in his own house. But I didn't care anymore. I walked into his room. The cold air hit me. It smelled like damp earth and decaying leaves. Outside, the trees loomed, twisted and skeletal against the gray sky. I walked up to the window, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and fear. The frame was icy to the touch. With effort, I pushed it shut. The crash of the window closing was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I locked the latch, and the harsh metallic click echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the room. For good measure, I drew the thick curtains, blocking out the gray daylight. The change was immediate. For the first time since I'd arrived, the room felt like a part of a home. The oppressive, wild presence of nature vanished. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the quiet, warm air. I felt triumphant. I had fixed it. I had finally taken control of the situation. My brother came home late in the evening. He looked tired, but the usual tension wasn't there. He didn't mention the window. We had dinner, watched TV. The house felt warm, peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like everything was going to be okay. When he went to bed, he simply said, "Good night," and shut his door. He didn't even notice. The curtains were drawn, and he was too immersed in his own world. I went back to my room, feeling justified, even smug. I fell asleep faster than I had in a long time, wrapped in the cozy warmth and silence. Then I was awoken by screams. It was primal, raw, pure agony. The sound of sheer terror pierced the stillness of the house. My heart leapt in my chest, and I bolted upright. I rushed to his door, yanking the handle. It was locked. Hey, what's going on?" I yelled, pounding on the door. His screams turned into gasping, desperate sobs. I can't breathe!" "Open the door," I shouted, tugging at the handle. "Just let me in." "No, don't come in," he screamed, his voice trembling with panic. "Oh God, what have you done? What have you done?" "I don't understand," I yelled. "Let me in." "The window!" he shrieked, and his cry froze my blood. "You closed it! I can feel it! You closed it!" Suddenly, a loud thud shook the doorframe, like he threw himself against it. Then another. "It was cold!" I screamed back, my voice shaking. "It was just a window!" He burst out into gurgling, manic laughter, the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. "The window? You think it was for me? You idiot! It was to let it out!" Rational thought started to slip away from me. I felt like the ground beneath me was tilting. "What do you mean? What do you mean it?" I whispered. "The thing in the trees!" he screamed. "The price! He told me! He said I wouldn't go home alone! It followed me! It's always been with me!" The desert story hit me again, with fresh force. The shaman, the price. The anchor with the chain. I heard him scramble away from the door, his breath frantic and wet. "The nightmares! That's where it lived!" he gasped, his voice growing weaker. "In my head! In my dreams! It was contained. It could watch from outside, through the window. It could leave for a while, the open air, let it escape, let it dissipate." The door slammed again, harder this time. The wood creaked. I backed away, holding my mouth shut. "You closed it," he whispered, his voice trembling with an inhuman fear. "You sealed the room. Now it has nowhere to go. It was in my head, but now it wants to break free." I heard a dry, cracking sound from inside. Not the door, something else. The sound was like bone snapping. My brother let out a thin, piercing wail that suddenly cut off. And then there was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence, worse than the screams. "Hey," I whispered, my voice small and weak. "Are you okay?" No answer. I stood in the dark hallway, feeling like an eternity passed as I pressed my ear to the cold door. The house was still. The house was warm. Then I heard the scratching. This time it was coming from the other side of the door, right there. It wasn't my brother's nails this time. It was slower, more deliberate, deeper. The sound of something hard and sharp dragged across wood, leaving a groove. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. I staggered back, my legs like jelly. I ran into my room, slamming the door shut behind me, struggling to turn the lock. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries. I shoved the desk chair under the handle. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. I mumbled something about a break-in, home invasion, my brother screaming. The calm, professional voice of the dispatcher anchored me in the swirling madness. She told me to stay on the line, stay in a safe room. The scratching stopped. I held my breath, listening. Silence stretched out. Maybe it was over. Maybe he passed out. Maybe I had a psychotic break. Then the scratching started again. It's right here. Right now as I type this, my fingers shaking. It's methodical. Patient. It's checking the door, finding the seams. Scratch, scratch. It's lower than a person could reach. The scratching stopped again. I hear a faint, wet, slithering sound. Something's pressing against the bottom of the door. There's a small gap, maybe half an inch. Oh God, I can see it. From the thin gap in the darkness beneath my door, a finger slides through. It's pale, like dead flesh or old birch bark. It's too long. Too long. The joint bends at an impossible angle to slip through. It's thin, unnaturally thin, like a stretched piece of caramel. Then another finger follows. And another. They're no longer fingers. They're like the legs of some colorless insect. They move so slowly. Then, deliberately, the tips of these things start tapping lightly against the inside of my door. Tap, tap, tap. I hear sirens in the distance. They're so far away, and it feels like the tall, thin man wants me right now. I ended a 7-year relationship. When I was 21, I met Jay, a 27-year-old guy, on a dating app. To be honest, I wasn't completely sure about him at first, but he quickly won me over. He was, by far, the best romantic partner I'd ever had. He was the kind of guy who would bring flowers on every date, listen without judgment, and never make any inappropriate or rude comments. He made me feel like the happiest girl in the world. But things changed when I finally fell for him, head over heels. It turned out that everything wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Even after 2 months of regular dates and weekends spent together, we'd never really discussed what we were. I thought we were in a relationship, but one night, when we were lying in bed, I told him how I'd always dreamed of getting married and having kids. He responded by saying that he loved me so much, but couldn't commit to a relationship because if it didn't work out, he would lose me, and he couldn't imagine losing someone as important to him as I was. I was completely thrown off and tried to reason with him. I told him that I would never ruin what we had. I wasn't the type of person to cheat, and if there weren't serious issues, like fighting or infidelity, I didn't see why we couldn't give it a shot. But Jay didn't agree with me. Instead, he convinced me to leave things as they were, saying that he felt a real connection between us that he didn't want to ruin. I had a feeling that he had some commitment issues, but since I was completely in love with him, I didn't want to mess things up by pushing too hard for labels. I ended up in a situation where we were in a non-committed relationship, one that I didn't even know existed until 2 months in. But everything else stayed the same. Every Friday night, he would pick me up for dinner, we'd hang out at my place, and by Saturday morning, he would leave with a kiss on my forehead. This went on for several months, and 6 months in, I found out I was pregnant. I was in a panic. I was in my last year of college with finals coming up next month, and I had no idea what to do. I tried calling Jay, but he didn't answer. Then again, he never answered calls or messages on Mondays. I waited for him to call me back, but he never did. A whole week passed, and he didn't even show up that Friday night. By Saturday, I was 6 weeks pregnant. Time was running out, and I knew that if I didn't do something soon, I'd have to consider an abortion. I went to the pharmacy, bought the medication for a medical abortion, and did it as soon as I could. Not because I didn't want the baby, but because I knew that if I kept the child, I wouldn't be able to give it the life it deserved. I wasn't even sure Jay would want to be involved in this child's life. I couldn't raise a child that would never know who its father was. I fell into a deep depression. I failed my final exams. I couldn't stop feeling guilty about the abortion, and Jay never bothered to return my messages. I felt completely lost and alone, but I tried to move on with my life. 2 months later, I saw a Facebook post from Jay announcing his engagement to his girlfriend, the one he had been with for 7 years. I was shattered. Everything I had believed in crumbled right in front of me. I knew that Jay had, without saying a word, destroyed everything we had. I also knew that he would never come back, but a small part of me still held on to hope. Maybe he was stuck in something he couldn't get out of. Maybe he was just as scared as I was, and he'd eventually call me. But that hope died right there, in front of my eyes. My hands were shaking. I felt betrayed, worthless, and ugly, standing in front of the girl he was holding in that post. She was everything I wasn't. I did some digging and got the phone number of his fiancée. I called her, my hands trembling, my throat dry, unable to speak. I hung up, then tried again, asking about Jay. She immediately understood what was going on and politely asked me to tell her everything. I told her everything, the messages, the phone calls, the screenshots of his dating profile I had taken when we first started talking. I gave her everything. The next day, I got a long message from Jay. It was full of accusations. He called me a liar, a desperate girl, and said that I had fabricated all the messages and the dating profile because I couldn't have him. So I was trying to ruin his engagement. That's when I finally snapped. I sent his fiancée all our pictures together, including the naked photos he had sent me, which were still in my iCloud. She called off the wedding and broke up with him. The shoe return incident. I work in a shoe store, and one afternoon a customer walked in holding a pair of shoes with a receipt from 2 years ago. At first, I thought maybe they had come in for a new size or something minor, but no, this was far more complicated. The customer was demanding a full refund for the shoes, claiming they were defective. Now, if there's one thing I know from working in retail, it's that people love to claim something is defective when the product is just worn out. And these shoes? Well, they were in awful condition. The soles were completely worn down to the point where you could see the underlayer of the material. The laces were so dirty, they looked like they'd been dragged through mud. The leather, which was once shiny, was scuffed and cracked. It was obvious these shoes had been worn every day for a very long time, likely months, possibly even longer. The customer, however, was adamant that they were defective. He said that the shoes had a manufacturing issue and that the description on the box, which promised durability, was misleading. According to him, the shoes should have lasted much longer than they did. I tried to explain calmly that the store's return policy only allows for refunds within 30 days of purchase. I told him that based on the condition of the shoes, it was clear that they had been used heavily. They weren't defective, they were simply worn out from regular use over 2 years. But that didn't sit well with the customer. Instead of backing down, he began to raise his voice. He threatened to sue the store for false advertising and started loudly claiming that he was a loyal customer. According to him, such a poor experience was unacceptable and he wouldn't stand for it. I kept my composure and repeated the store's policy, but it was clear that the situation was escalating. Just then, the manager came over, noticing the commotion. He quickly assessed the situation. He looked at the shoes, glanced at the receipt, and then turned to the customer. Without hesitating, the manager gave the customer a completely new pair of shoes. The same brand, same style, no questions asked. He processed a full exchange, and the customer walked out smiling, satisfied with the resolution. I was left standing there, confused and a little frustrated. The rules clearly stated that returns were only accepted within 30 days. But here we were, giving away a pair of shoes worth $80 to avoid conflict. I couldn't help but wonder, why bother with rules if we're just going to ignore them whenever someone makes a big enough fuss? I was also left feeling a bit disillusioned, knowing that we were essentially rewarding a customer for pushing the limits of the return policy with threats. Later, I had a chance to speak with my manager about it. He explained that it was simply easier and cheaper to replace the shoes than to risk a potential complaint to the corporate office or even a lawsuit. He said that while following the rules might seem important on paper, it wasn't always practical in the real world, especially when it came to keeping customers happy and avoiding any negative fallout. The way he put it was simple. It's better to just give them what they want and move on. In his view, keeping the peace, even at the cost of ignoring the policy, was a small price to pay. As much as I understood his reasoning, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. The entire situation left a bad taste in my mouth. I kept thinking about how easily the customer had manipulated the situation by threatening legal action. It made me question how often this kind of thing happens in retail. How many times have companies caved under pressure just to avoid confrontation or bad publicity? How often do customers get away with bending the rules because they're loud or persistent enough? At the same time, I understood the bigger picture. In retail, customer satisfaction is often prioritized above everything else, even when it means disregarding policies. After all, if a store gets enough bad reviews or complaints, it could hurt their business. Sometimes, the cost of standing firm on a return policy isn't worth the potential damage to the brand's reputation. But then again, it seems like we, the employees, are stuck in this tricky position where we have to make decisions on the fly, and often, those decisions don't align with what the company's policies actually state. I couldn't help but feel a sense of frustration. The rules were there for a reason, to protect both the company and the customers. But when it came down to it, those rules were being bent or outright ignored in favor of appeasing someone who wasn't even willing to listen to reason. It's a delicate balance. On the one hand, we have a duty to follow the rules, but on the other hand, we have a duty to make the customer happy. That's the fine line many of us in retail walk every day. That night, I went home and tried to shake off the weird feeling. I flopped down on the couch, grabbed my controller, and spent the rest of the night playing Grizzly's Quest, a game I'd been trying to finish for a while. It was a nice distraction from the events of the day, but the frustration still lingered. How many other times would I be put in a situation like that? How many times would I have to choose between following the rules and keeping the peace? The uncertainty was unsettling. It's funny, retail work can teach you a lot about people, but it can also make you question the very systems we rely on. When the rules are just guidelines that are flexible depending on how loud you can shout, it's hard not to feel like the whole system is a bit broken. Still, it's a job, and as long as the customer is happy, I guess that's what matters most, right?